from the crew at Not Centralized and doing this for the Redbelly Insights podcast. This is episode 6. I can't believe that we've gotten up to this many episodes. We've got a banger of an episode here today. Nick from Fireblocks. Nick, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, how are you?
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me. I'm doing very well at the moment. Thank you.
Very good. You're calling in from where? You're down in Melbourne, right?
Yeah, I'm based in Melbourne, in Australia. Nice and cold down here at the moment.
I'm in a hoodie. I'm in Sydney, and Sydney's supposed to be the warmest city, but we had like 5 degrees, which I know is just like that's nothing compared to like Melbourne. But I see you're in the jacket as well. So
yeah, a little bit cold. I'm working from home here at the moment, but a little bit cold. Yeah.
Oh, lovely, lovely. Nick, now most folks don't know that we actually go a little bit further back. We've known you in the Australian space since myself and some people know my colleague Arturo have been in here, and Fireblocks has always been a kind of stalwart to us, like a bastion of like good infrastructure, what good looks like in the space, and we've done some things together, such as we've interviewed your CEO, Michael, when he came down from New York in both Sydney and Melbourne. But it really just goes to show that Fireblocks has not only been building stuff, but also been part of the community, the Australian ecosystem, as well as many others around the world. And you guys were also part of like the, when they had the physical space Upside sitting over there at their offices. So for folks that don't know, Australia had this warehouse of crypto businesses all sitting in literally a 5-story warehouse, which was great. But yeah, do you guys have, is there an official kind of office now that things have like changed, or is everyone work from home? What's the story?
Yeah. So look, I've been at Fireblocks for 3.5 years now. And as you said, we're at Upside. We have moved out of Upside, or that was closed down. And we've got another office now around Chapel Street. So not too far from where Upside was.
Perfect.
And there's probably around about 15 or 20 of us there now from Fireblocks.
Oh, fantastic. Well, the team has grown since we first saw you guys. I used to live in Chapel Street for folks that watching in Melbourne, very good for shopping, was very good for clubbing when I was younger. But in any case, this is the Insights episode. We had episode 5 last week, and that was with MetaWealth. And they're tokenizing real estate and some really interesting stuff that they're doing in Rome. So, people that are on Redbelly get exposure to some really interesting things there. But today we're going to talk about digital asset custody. And it's a bit of an interesting conversation because most people just like get into crypto. They want to buy the tokens. It's great to have these investments and speculate and whatnot, but there's real world businesses doing stuff. And if we think about how markets particularly work, you can't have it without like safe infrastructure. And you guys are definitely part of that. So for anyone that's not familiar with Fireblocks, what's the elevator pitch? What problems are you solving for institutions and say digital assets?
Yeah, that's a good question. A good place to start. So if I think about Fireblocks, like one of the best places to start, or where I always start, is talking about our origin story. So how Fireblocks started. And so in 2017, there was a famous or infamous hacker group called Lazarus. And they attacked 4 South Korean exchanges and stole over 200 million in Bitcoin from those exchanges. And our founders were working at Checkpoint at the time, and they were part of a task force that was sent to go out and help investigate these attacks on those exchanges. And after they did the investigation, they kind of worked out 2 things. They worked out, one, that nation states or these kind of criminal organizations were going to be going after crypto because it's an easy target. And then the second thing that they realized was that there were no kind of enterprise grade solutions that were actually good enough to protect against these nation states. And so some of the issues that they noticed was, how do you protect the private key? So most people on the call would know what a private key is. And how do you protect that but still make it usable? So that was one of the things. How do you ensure that the address that you're sending to is the address that you're meant to send it to? So a nation state hasn't sort of modified that address somewhere on your computer. And then, as exchanges get bigger and they're holding like big honeypots of money, how do you make sure that there's no one inside the organization colluding against you? So they ended up launching Fireblocks in 2019. We came out of stealth. Since then, we've raised $1 billion and we're valued at $8 billion since our Series E, which is pretty cool. We support over 2,000 institutions globally and lots of Australian companies as well, like ANZ Bank, Redbelly is another one of our customers, Zero Cap. And we've secured $10 trillion of assets transferred across the Fireblocks network and over 300 million wallets. So that's Fireblocks.
That is amazing. I saw another talk from one of your American colleagues where I think it was like they looked at numbers just for 2024, and it was like $3.5 trillion in notional value, transaction value, which ranged across 30 million plus unique transactions. That's a lot of business that's going on. So for startups that are watching this space, or for folks that are just like investing, wanting to understand the seriousness of Fireblocks, I think numbers like that paint a pretty big picture as to what it is that infrastructure players like yourselves have been able to do. And if you look back, folks, like look up all the YouTube kind of like podcast series on this where you guys have spoken. There's a lot of really interesting kind of like backdrop as to the story. I remember hearing Michael tell us this story. We had a personal interview with him. He was kind enough to do that a few years ago down in Melbourne, and it's just this important thing, because things are just too important. It's not like we can just trust that people should be smart about what they do. Yeah, that's true, but we can also do something about it. It's not the point that people should be smart enough. We're human, right? We should have infrastructure that's safe, that does this. And given what you guys do, if people want to go, well, how can we trust you? Like you said, those banks, there's also BNY Mellon, there's also BNP Paribas, these big institutions in Europe and the US. You guys have become the go-to infrastructure for some of, for the biggest names that are out there and growing. What do these institutions need when it comes to custody and security?
Yeah, so like if you think about those names, like you mentioned BNY Mellon, what they're trying to do is protect their millions of customers, and so it's their reputation on the line when it comes to protecting digital assets. And BNY Mellon in particular, they are holding Bitcoin and Ethereum for ETFs, or for some of the ETFs in the US. And if any of that got moved or got stolen, then that would ruin their reputation for good, right? So they need kind of institutional grade security. And what that essentially means is something that's been battle tested. And so against these nation states and criminal organizations, that it's something that has been battle tested. And so the way Fireblocks works is we ensure that your crypto is protected in layers. So we've got multiple different layers of protection. I've worked in security for 20 years. There's never one single bullet that's going to protect you. So you need to protect in layers. So if we think about some of the layers at Fireblocks, we've got this zero trust layer at the start, which means all of the servers inside our core, they don't trust each other. You have to authenticate and encrypt talking between them. Then we use a technology called MPC. And so again, your listeners would be aware of private keys. MPC, what it does is it reduces that single point of failure for a private key, so that you've got 3 separate key shares, and we store those key shares in secure enclaves. So your listeners would be aware of like your Apple iPhone that's got a secure enclave in it. Well, we store them in them, but also in enterprise grade versions on like Amazon, Azure, and AWS. And then a layer on top of that is we have this governance layer, which says where you're allowed to send your digital assets. So it would say, okay, I'm only allowed to send assets to this exchange or to this destination on the Redbelly network. And if I want to send somewhere else, then I need approval from maybe 3 or 4 people inside my organization. And then finally, the last kind of bit is many of the organizations we deal with, they have to meet regulatory compliance. So sometimes it'll be hot. They need to store it on hot or warm, but other times in countries like Singapore, it needs to be stored on sort of cold storage. And some can't use MPC either, and they have to use things called HSMs. And HSMs are like a hardware device, but banks have been using them for the last 2 or 3 decades, and they're really familiar with them. So we integrate with those as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think you touched on a really interesting point given that there's different jurisdictions and there's different requirements that they have, and it changes over time, and needing to navigate that, like any business that is doing, especially international kind of like, whether it's trading or that they're trying to provide infrastructure themselves, and there are these different components that need to be understood. It's not just, hey, I'll build the tech and put it out there. It never really works that way. You have to understand the jurisdiction. You have to understand it's also like a cultural kind of thing as well. Like certain things going to be more interesting to investors or users in different markets. And so it really touches on that important point that you guys provide that ability to really understand. That's part of the service, that you can work well with these like different jurisdictions and just offer that level of safety. Because if I have to start everything from scratch as a startup, my goodness, there's going to be so much like work there. But
Yeah, exactly.
it's I guess that's why Redbelly has chosen to work with you guys. So there's been this recent integration with the Redbelly network. What is this in your mind, like what does this unlock for the ecosystem?
Yeah, so look, I work pretty closely with the Redbelly team to facilitate this integration. So I know many of the people at Redbelly, but essentially, now that it's integrated, when our Fireblocks customers come on board, they get access to around about 100 different blockchains. Many of the public ones that Bitcoin and Ethereum, but they also now get access instantly to Redbelly. And so what's sort of unique about that is that Redbelly it gives them access to a blockchain where the participants are known on that blockchain. And so that's a requirement that many of the banks talk to us about, that like that it's a compliant blockchain, that you need to KYC before you can use it. And there aren't, or in any that I know, blockchains that are like that. So you kind of get access to that straight away. And then sort of what Fireblocks brings to that is the security of the access to that blockchain. So that's what the enterprises need. It also gives them the ability to tokenize securely onto that chain, and the workflows that you need around tokenization, and essentially just ensuring that your private keys are never exposed to the people that you don't want them to be.
Yeah, it's really interesting there because, look, put it this way, there's a whole lot of stuff going on when it comes to the tokenization kind of space. They do, you know, currently have various kind of narratives. So, I mean, in the whole kind of blockchain space, stablecoins is like a massive kind of feature. Tokenization is the next one. I was watching a traditional kind of finance episode for a group called Risk.net. I don't know if you've heard of those guys. From my investment banking days, they would do various webinars, and it's really interesting to see that traditional finance, and this is a tailwind for any folks that are listening. And I mean, this is a push that blockchain is going to be, really the infrastructure of the future, because you've got more of these folks starting to get into this space that you guys were in already for a number of years. So you're veterans. But what they highlighted as part of that was that there's a whole lot of infrastructure that's needed. It's not just that, hey, let's just trade with each other. They're not going to trust systems that they're not going to trust, an asset class that is crypto and blockchain unless it has these sorts of infrastructure that they're used to. I think we bring programmability that they don't have. We bring efficiency. We bring a lower cost kind of tool. But they have these infrastructure needs like clearing and settlement. Custody is a major one that's out there. And so I think it's really important for people to realize that what you're doing here is something that's really going to drive the market forward. In terms of the partnership, if I just go back to some of the announcements that were made, there was a line that stood out. It said that this partnership brings Fireblocks cutting edge security to Redbelly's compliant tokenization network. What does this look like in practice, and why do you think it's important?
Yeah. So specifically around tokenization, Fireblocks has, like, when you log into Fireblocks, you get this marketplace, and inside that marketplace, you can select various tokens that you want to deploy. So whether you're deploying a stable coin, whether you're deploying a security or a commodity, whatever you want to do. And from that marketplace, now you can securely deploy that onto the Redbelly network within just a couple of clicks of a button. And once you've deployed it, then you've got workflows around who in your organization can, issue that stable coin, and who might be able to distribute it and where they can distribute it. And to give you kind of a more real world example, we've been working with a customer called Katina Digital recently, an Australian customer, and they're working towards deploying their stablecoin onto Redbelly. And what this will allow them to do is they can take that already audited smart contract that Fireblocks has audited. So, it's out of the box, that there's not going to be issues with it, and then securely deploy that onto Redbelly. And then when they're licensed, they'll be able to start using that with customers. And as you said, with tokenization taking off, one of the most important factors is going to be the money leg for acquiring tokens. So that's going to be a big thing coming soon to Redbelly.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fascinating, all that kind of stuff. And people in the space like that, they will have seen that there's a whole lot of like other kind of blockchains, and whether you want to look at it from blockchain networks themselves or the projects that are built on them, all of them have, well, not all of them, but the ones that have crypto tokens that you can invest in. There's definitely been a good long history. I mean, I think it was just the other day that we had, was it about a decade since like the Bitcoin pizza guy, the guy that like he paid X many Bitcoin 19 or whatever it was, which is worth the equivalent of this today. I remember that day because it's the same as my mum's birthday. Shout out to her, like 22nd of May every year we have Bitcoin kind of pizza day. I say all this because when you have a network that has grown out of the degen kind of market, out of these groups that wanted to be anti-establishment, anti-traditional kind of finance, they've created some really great technology. But to take things mainstream, just like we had the Pirate Bay before, and then Spotify is what took music mainstream, arguments against them being good and bad aside, I can see, this space really growing forward, if people want to think about it, that when we have a lot of blockchain being used by institutions, they're starting to experiment with it now, but there's going to be so much more that like happens. You mentioned Katina Digital. You mentioned some of the other banks and stuff there. The fact that they need cutting edge security, they need this compliant tokenization from Redbelly. I think these are just big positive signs that we're in the right space. And do you think that we're early a little bit? Do you think that there's still so much more to come? I'd love to hear your opinion on that. Because I think people don't really like realize they may think, oh, well, where's all the blockchain kind of stuff? Because we've been around for a while, but there's still so much more to come, is kind of like in my mind. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think we're definitely at the early stages, because if you think about what we've started to tokenize already, it's only a few different asset classes. So we've started
Mm,
to tokenize money. People are starting to use that. And then there's a couple of different asset classes we've started to tokenize as well, like money market funds and bonds. But there's a great site, RWA.xyz, and it's quite small at the moment. So I still think we're very early when it comes to this real world asset coming on chain. They're still, we're just at the start of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's interesting you bring up the RWA.xyz. They're one of the trackers that are out there. There's also RWA.io, and there's this big debate around, hang on a second. Well, Redbelly, in particular, we appear on RWA.io, and then the XYZ one, it's not there, and it's given how they track things. So they will only track if absolutely everything is on chain, and there's no more Web 2 sort of thing. So if you imagine that we're in a real world, and given how change management works, given how systems don't just get turned off and then the other one turned on, there's these parallelization of kind of systems, and there's a whole heap of stuff that has to happen. I mean, TVL is one of the things that is measured there, but there's a whole lot of like other things that are in place that need to happen for us to actually take advantage of the operations that blockchain can bring. Do you see much debate around that yourselves at Fireblocks around how best to measure real world asset or RWA tokenization? Is that a topic that comes up at all?
No, it's not really. No, it's not something that we get into the debates about, because the metrics that Fireblocks kind of care about is scale. So
Mm,
we care about how many transactions we're seeing coming through our environment at a time,
mhm,
and whether we can scale to meet our customer needs. So, for example, we did an analysis recently that looked at all of the different blockchains and how many transactions were going across them. And we worked out that Fireblocks was involved in 15% of those transactions.
Wow.
So across all blockchains, Bitcoin and Ethereum were around 15%. So yeah, they're more the metrics that we kind of like to look at.
No, that's fantastic. Just you know, I think it's important to have these like measures there because it shows you just how the industry is growing, and you know, definitely mark this date because the you know, 15% now. Next time we bring you back on, who knows what it could be. But back on the Redbelly side now, they've got billions in tokenized assets, and they're pioneering. Let's call it like identity-aware infrastructure. How does Fireblocks, with the stuff that you guys do, help elevate or even protect that sort of scale?
So yeah, from a scale perspective, I guess it's to like what I said just before, like being able to scale and handle the 15% of blockchain transactions across all networks. That's really important. Also being an API kind of first company. So everything when you need to work at those kind of scales, you need to be able to automate all of your transactions. So Fireblocks is an API driven company. If you need to mint a stablecoin or mint a token onto a blockchain, you don't want to be doing that manually. You want to be embedding an API into your application. So that's really important that you can do all of these things with an API that abstracts away the complexities of the blockchains in the background. As far as Redbelly's identity-aware infrastructure, I think that's like it's going to be really exciting as well. It brings sort of like a new layer of on-chain trust, so that you know which transaction is tied to an identity. But then outside of that, there's still going to be off-chain controls that you still need, and I think that's where Fireblocks ties into Redbelly. So you'll need like segregation of duties. A certain person is allowed to issue this digital asset, but then another person might need to approve it. We talked about collusion a little bit earlier as well, making sure that someone's not issuing your stable coin, quickly going and swapping it and then cashing out somewhere else, things like that. And probably the biggest one that it's definitely been fixed now, but in the early days, we had developers that had God mode, you know, a developer that could control every function on the smart contract, even though they probably shouldn't. So things like pausing the smart contract, whitelisting and blacklisting, all those kind of things. You want to make sure that you know, only certain business people inside your organization can do that, as opposed to everyone.
No, that's really interesting. It just reminds me of you know, so many interesting things that we learned along the way coming into this space. Like you have these aha moments sort of things, and I guess one of the early ones was that when the whether it was like the DAO you know, phase and whatnot, or the ICO phase, there were a lot of these things that happened where we had promises of, okay, you're going to get 5% for the sweat equity that you're doing, and it's just verbal promises, and maybe even if it's written down in a contract or whatever, cool, but it's not actually in the smart contracts. And we've got these tools that don't just have to be for transferring, but they can embed rules into that, so you don't have to worry about, okay, we'll have to try to enforce it after the fact, or hope that we're going to, you know, have the right thing done by us. We're working with these tools that can provide that. However, we weren't actually bringing it into the infrastructure in terms of how we're running things. So devs with God mode certainly is a scary kind of thing, and it just speaks to the wild west that crypto was, and in some ways still is, because there are certainly groups out there that are not using Fireblocks, and they're doing things in that kind of wild west way. Now, would you say that you know, if folks are looking at projects that these are the sorts of things they need to look for? Like, is Fireblocks involved? Do you guys see yourselves as like you know, bringing that sort of protection and that green tick that you know, people look for when it comes to projects like this?
Yeah, it definitely happens. Like, so we're in a very privileged position that we get to speak to people very early on in their conversation. Like if they've just got funding, and then maybe they've spoken to a lawyer, and then the next thing that they often need is custody. And it does help them also with, like, even if they're pre-funding, knowing that they've got Fireblocks and that they're planning to use the Fireblock stack does help them with stuff like that. So we definitely get involved with those conversations. And it definitely helps those startups knowing that they're going to be securing those assets well.
That's an important message for folks that are listening, because surely there are some that, they're thinking about, okay, we've just got this idea. We speak to folks in, when I wear my other hat, that have an idea for how blockchain can help with this inefficiency that's going on in their healthcare, their legal, their finance kind of space, whatever industry they're coming from. So I think it's important to know that they don't have to wait until they're huge before they can actually work with a business like yours. It's one of those that can grow and evolve over time. Now,
Yeah, we definitely have customers that start off quite small, don't have
mm,
to pay much, and then they grow as we grow with them as they grow. Yeah.
that's pretty fair. I mean, and just being able to have that and have that protection as they go along the way is really interesting. I want to take a step back, and I'm framing this around the whole kind of project Acacia, which some people may know as what the Reserve Bank of Australia, our central bank, for folks that are hearing that for the first time, is doing in terms of testing this time around for Project Acacia. It is wholesale tokenized assets. And they did another test 2 years ago, seeing the efficacy of a CBDC with a mix of teams doing stuff there, ranging from retail type CBDCs to wholesale. Majority were wholesale, and there's been word on that, like with public announcements, that they'll focus more on wholesale. I mean, they say it in the name for Project Acacia. But if I could just take you, because you've been with Fireblocks back then, but going all the way back to that. Now, could you walk us through what your role was there, and what made it significant?
Yeah. So I'm a pre-sales engineer at Fireblocks, which means I'm in a technical role, and I get to work on proof of concepts and pilots and things like that with customers. And so I got to work directly on this pilot, which was a lot of fun. And Fireblocks got to power the EAUD, or the CBDC, that they issued onto their private chain. So the Reserve Bank of Australia, or it was actually the DFCRC, the Digital Finance Group that works on behalf of the RBA, they came to Fireblocks and said, "We've got a private chain, Quorum," maybe because Redbelly didn't exist at the time. And they said, we want to issue a stable coin or a CBDC onto that private chain. And we've got the smart contracts. Are you able to help us with that? And so essentially, yeah, we provided the technology that allowed the bank to issue a liability to the RBA. So essentially, it was real world money. They did some tests, of course, first, but they issued real world CBDC onto this private chain. And we helped them with things like the minting and the burning of that CBDC. We enabled like ANZ Bank to be able to distribute the CBDC to other participants. And then also every participant had to be whitelisted. So we enabled that as well. And I think we supported we did support 7 of the 14 other use cases as well in that pilot. And that was ranging from ANZ Bank to Commonwealth Bank and Imperium Markets as well.
Yeah, there were certainly some interesting ones out there. Putting our hand up, not centralized. We did the construction payments, where the fact that escrows are not even touched by builders when it comes to jobs that are like $20,000, $50,000. There's a lot of money floating out there where they'll work for 30 days, they'll issue an invoice, wait another 30 days. There's 60 days at minimum before they even get paid. And they don't even know if the other side has the funds or not. Now, take away builders, that's consultants. I mean, even in your own employment at work, how do you know the business has money? I mean, there's signs. If your business is running out of money, I would assume there are signs
There definitely are.
that you see earlier on. But just the importance of what blockchain can provide. So there was a great number of tests that were out there. Going back to that, and I'm sure you've got your biases, but like, do you remember like some of the interesting ones? Like, were there ones that were really standouts for you in terms of the different tests that were done? Because there were certainly some unique things that I'd never thought of before, and it's like, oh, that's an interesting use case.
Yeah, look, there were a couple. The Commonwealth Bank one, where they tokenized a biodiversity token and then created a marketplace for swapping that. That I thought that was interesting. ANZ Bank worked on SuperStream payments to try and help speed that up using central bank digital currencies. That was also interesting. Yeah, there was a couple. I think this time around with Project Acacia, it's going to be even more exciting though, because as you've probably seen, they've shortlisted other chains. So
Yep.
it's not just going to be a private chain, and people are going to be able to use kind of more real world. So they've
Mm.
shortlisted chains like Redbelly and some private EVMs. And I think that's going to be more interesting because it's going to start to see how the CBDC is going to be used more in the real world,
Yeah.
because there'll be more flexibility to use your own contracts and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And when you look at the evolution of this, even before the CBDC pilot in 2021, I think it was Project Atom is what they called it. And that
Mm.
was an even more closed room test. They pre-selected the groups. There was only a few of them to do some testing and like a lot of research. Then it was more live testing, but on private version of Ethereum and what you guys provided and others to help set up that infrastructure. But it wasn't anything like public or public permissioned, like we're seeing now in terms of the options. And you're right, Redbelly is shortlisted. We're hoping to hear some announcements on that soon. So nothing there yet, but they have been giving good market updates. People can see something from, I think it's the 8th of May. That was an announcement from DFCRC, so Digital Finance CRC, on this topic there. And yeah, we're really excited to see what gets selected. I'm with you. Like if the things that we have put forward ourselves, along with the groups that we work with, have been selected there, then it's going to be making for some really interesting things that both the world of blockchain and the world of traditional finance, I think, will perk up and pay attention to, because it's stuff that talks to both. It brings the maturity up for blockchain, and it makes some interesting new technology tools available for the non-blockchain kind of space. But at the end of the day, it's going to be technology. In a few years' time, like it won't be like blockchain versus this. It'll just be part of what we do. Now, going back to it, you mentioned ANZ Bank there as part of the works that you guys have been groups that you've been working with, with the CBDC pilot and others, and even away from those tests. But between ANZ and Redbelly, you're operating at the very frontier of, let's call it, regulated blockchain. What patterns are you seeing in how real world assets are being tokenized today? And where do you think that kind of stuff is headed?
Yeah, although it's probably an obvious one, I think the most exciting thing at the moment is around stablecoins, because the market cap's just gone over, what is it, 250 billion. We saw a lot of sort of pilots of people testing creating stablecoins, but that's now moved across to critical infrastructure. Like you're seeing Stripe using stablecoins. I think that's really exciting. Um, you mentioned that 3 trillion figure, of transfers that went across Fireblocks. 55% of that was stablecoins last year. So it's a huge use case that sort of can't be forgotten. And that to us equates to $40 billion in stablecoin volume per quarter that goes through Fireblocks. Some of the other things that are interesting in tokenization would be the tokenization of money market funds. So we helped securitize, tokenize a money market fund for BlackRock not too long ago, and that kind of allows crypto native people more in the enterprise world to stay on chain, but then still earn a yield in like a very low risk way. So I think that's interesting. And then to your other question, like where is it headed? I think obviously it's headed that everything or every financial asset is eventually going to be tokenized. And it'll just be hidden in the background. You won't really know that it's happening. A lot of this stuff is sort of background technology, and it should hopefully, in a good way, fade away into the background.
I think it's a great point. I don't know if you remember this, but Starbucks, for example, for their loyalty program, they didn't say it's blockchain. They just had
Yeah.
a loyalty program that automated things, was run on smart contracts. Yes, it was blockchain to the blockchain world, but to the real world, they didn't care. It was just better tech. It's like that Steve Jobs stuff. Like he never spoke about on stage when he announced the iPhones. Oh, this has this kind of chip and it's got this new feature in here, tech wizardry, whatever. It's 1,000 songs, 10,000 songs in your pocket. It's this, it's that, it's the features and benefits that come out of it. You mentioned something there on like that with the stable coins being such an important thing. I heard a figure, I think it's only the last week or two, where for the first time traditional finance or institutions in terms of how they're using stablecoins overtook usage of retail usage of stablecoins for the first time. So before, if you think about it, most people using stablecoins for transfers and for, we've got groups like Stables, for example, where I can have their wallet pay. If I've got USDC on that, I can go to my local supermarket, tap my phone app, and I'm paying because they've got a MasterCard app. So I am literally paying with crypto. That big gripe that people had that, oh, you can't pay with crypto, but you can. Have been for a while, but for the first time, because us degens and retail folks, we were the ones that were using it the most, but now instos are using it more, so it's just crossed over that mark. So that's a really interesting sign. So I see that growing more, and just becoming part of, like what you said, every financial asset tokenized. So that's pretty big tailwind.
Yeah, it's huge. And I think the reason why you're seeing institutions come on board more is they're using it for cross-border payments. Like, it's a big use case where there's a lot of time delay, and so they can save a lot of time using it for cross-border payments there. And so that's why there's a big uptick there.
Yeah, I think that's definitely like the what could we call it? Almost like the first taste that they get for what blockchain can do. And once they start to see that working, then they'll go, okay, well, what else can we do? It works here. It's a good tool. It's cost efficient. This is better than the systems that we had before. They have their aha moment. They'll start to think about like other stuff that can be done. And maybe they hear about, oh, look at those pilots down in Australia for Project Acacia with their central bank, and they get ideas. So, a lot of positives in this space. Speaking of ideas, for platforms and projects looking to go from Web3 idea to institution-ready product, what kind of advice would you give?
Yeah, so I guess this is where I put my my security hat back on. So yeah, working in the security industry for 20 years before coming to Fireblocks, I think the Web 2 view of the world is move fast, break things. And in the Web 3 world, that can't really work too much because you're working with real funds, often they're bearer assets. If you lose them, uh, you're going to lose them. You can break things on the test net, but on the main net, that's a bit harder to do. So I would say to all of the startups out there, build with security in mind from day one. It's a little bit hard to retrofit security after you've already built your application. Once the smart contract's deployed, you can upgrade those smart contracts nowadays, but it's still, you don't want it out there with bugs in it. And so there was a stat that I heard recently that as of June, there was 3.3 billion have been lost in breaches and attacks. So it's quite a lot. So you have to make sure you think like a hacker, ensure that you've reduced the attack surface inside your applications, and Fireblock can definitely help with that, or your custody solution can definitely help with that. You want to reduce the blast radius so that if your application does get attacked in some way, they're not going to be able to move the digital assets or take over smart contracts and do things like we saw in the Bybit hack.
Yeah, speaking of the Bybit hack, that certainly must have been an interesting time, because I think it's moments like that that are kind of catalysts that put the call out for these things that you need to have in place. And for the, we hear it again. Oh, it was another social hack. Oh, here's this group that they didn't check like the wallet addresses and stuff. They just assumed it was fine. And sure, what they clicked on, it looked like the same kind of things that they would normally have. And certainly there's some stuff that is social, as in you need to be doing it yourself. And this is where maybe AI comes into it in the future, because it can act as that backup, agents that just don't sleep, but they actually know to check on certain things and be a good assistant for the human. But still, like we need these systems like you discussed. And even if you have all the best systems, I think what people do forget is, how do you actually reduce that blast radius? Like, do you think that there are things that just on that people just seem to just keep forgetting, that we just need to remind them of when it does come to this? You're a startup and you've got a great idea, and it's going to grow into this $1 million, $1 billion idea, but people just keep on forgetting. Like, do you see some common like things that are happening there?
Yeah, there's really simple things that customers can do, or startups can do. It's just things like If your business just requires you to send money to an exchange and then back again, then set up rules so that's all you can do with your wallets. Also, if it makes sense, add in a bit of friction and add in things like approvals, so that if you're sending large amounts of money somewhere, maybe that's out of the ordinary. So get someone to approve it and double check it. And probably the most important thing is you never want to be blind signing anything. Like you don't want to be, and so for people that don't know, blind signing means the transaction that you're signing, you can't read it, and it's sort of like zeros and ones, and you're just expected to know what that is. So whatever you're using should be able to decode the transaction and show you, actually, Nick, if you run this, you're not transferring $1 billion. You're actually rewriting your smart contract and giving ownership to somebody else. Let's block all those kind of types of transactions. So I think there's lots more, but they're kind of the main things that people should be looking at.
No, that's pretty good. I mean, when things like Bybit, that's the most recent. Like, there's been plenty more. There's sites that really track this, and they're anti-crypto, but I find them useful because it's like, well, it is the mirror that the industry needs to have on itself. Whether it's from the critics that aren't even open, their ears aren't even open to the positive side, but still, like, it's a good resource called Web3 is going great. And in terms of, the things that are going wrong in the space, they will track and they'll highlight the Bybit kind of stuff. But my question is, when stuff like that happens, what do you guys do internally? Just here in the office that you guys have in Australia, is there a conversation around it? Do you talk to the folks internationally as well? Is there a bit of an understanding, like an internal memo that goes out? And do you take that to customers as well, so that they may have concerns and stuff, and you help alleviate that?
Yeah, 100%. So with Bybit in particular, there was a big focus about it because it created a lot of concern in the market. So we've got in Israel, we have an entire security team, and they were meeting with customers kind of pretty much around the clock, just explaining to them what this hack means, how Fireblocks can potentially help. But then also there was a feature that Fireblocks has with Bybit called off exchange. And essentially, it's a common thing that people are starting to use. It allows you to lock your assets in something like Fireblocks, and then the funds will be mirrored onto the exchange. So that, and we had plenty of customers using that who weren't affected by the hack at all. So that, especially in the institutional space, that's where it's going a lot. It's you would lock your assets on chain, and then the funds get mirrored, and then the exchange knows that the assets there are safe. So if you lost that money, they can still get it. But then also, if something happens to the exchange, you are protected as the institution. So yeah, I think that's important because that's how the traditional finance world works as well, right?
Yeah.
Separating the execution from the custody. So I assume crypto will move towards that trend as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting, these things that you're speaking about, that uh, where we'll move to and stuff like. And if I go back, I remember hearing things, years ago, that we need to bring blockchain, or we need to bring the traditional finance folks into the world of blockchain, or and then realizing that, hang on, that's not going to work. Okay, cool. Let's change it. Let's bring the blockchain technology to the traditional finance space. And that's better, but still naive, because there are these things that traditional finance needs to have in order to trust, in order to use these assets, in order to just simply want to get involved. There's a bigger picture kind of talk there around, like, the crypto has a lack of the tools that investors need to have in a professional setting, such as options and futures markets. And yes, we've got a little bit of that, but we don't have enough. Options markets in crypto is only like 5% of the spot market, and that's just not how it works in traditional finance, because you need those to hedge. Another topic, but just in terms of the infrastructure where you guys play, have you seen that evolve in your time that you've been in here the last couple of years? Has that conversation matured? Was it something where years ago it was more of a, you had to educate the instos as to why they need this kind of stuff, or why blockchain is a good version, because they know they need it, but like, why blockchain is good? Has that education kind of thing evolved? Is it different now?
Yeah, it's definitely different. I remember very early on when I was sort of young and fresh at Fireblocks, I got to speak to some of the banks. And it was exciting because I got to educate them about like what's
Mm.
Ethereum, and how do you use Ethereum and things like that, and that felt really exciting. And now it's kind of the other way around. Banks know a lot about crypto. They know a lot about the space, and it's more Fireblocks is sort of helping the traditional finance start to integrate crypto into their platforms and things like that. So I think the worlds work well together. Crypto brings a lot to traditional finance, like you said, but traditional finance also, it has been around for decades, and they have learned lessons along the way as well. So I think it's exactly what you said, bringing both worlds together.
Yeah, it's really interesting because that what you said is being mirrored in webinars and conversations I'm seeing from folks in that traditional kind of finance space that are looking at digital assets. So now, as we round out, something that I wanted to ask you was like with regards to what's next, for Fireblocks from your purview, especially in where we sit. We're in the Asia Pacific region. We have callers in from many regions, although I think that probably not too many from the north side of the world, given the time zone. But especially in the Asia Pacific region, are there any big moves, features, partnerships on the horizon that you can talk about?
Yeah. So one thing in particular, we back on the stablecoin topic, we released a report around the state of stablecoins. So I'd highly recommend people go out and have a look at that. And we surveyed 300 sort of customers globally. They're a mixture of banks and PSPs. Um, and so that report's worth having a look at. And one thing that I found interesting in it is that I used to think that low cost was going to be the most important thing for stablecoins, but it appears that speed currently is what all of our customers are saying is the most important. And that links back to what I said around cross-border payments. It's that reducing that time is really important. And specifically around APAC, the customers that we spoke to, the reason why they're moving into stablecoins, it's because they want to expand into the other areas and other businesses. So 49% of customers said that they wanted to expand. Partnerships, we've worked with Layer Zero recently. So we created the ability to deploy a stable coin to 35 different blockchains in one go, and then be able to move liquidity between those different blockchains. And stablecoins is just the first step. So Layer Zero will be used for other things, but people need to get the money part right. And then I guess the last part is we had a sort of a seminar, online seminar recently called Fireblocks Pulse. And in that we talked about, Fireblocks' latest features. And one feature that was interesting, and hopefully I'm not going too technical here, but with the latest Ethereum upgrade, there was the ability to the EIP 7702. And so we took advantage of that feature, and we're going to allow our customers to have something called universal gasless. And I think as blockchains get adopted, gas is going to be one of these things that needs to be completely abstracted away. People don't want to have to make sure that they've got gas on, Redbelly or on Ethereum or on Solana. And so this universal gasless feature that we have just allows Fireblocks customers to get a relay to pay gas for them. So you think about it, if you're an exchange, you can, or maybe not even an exchange, just any customer that is supplying wallets to retail users, you can abstract away the gas and make sure it's paid by a relay. And that works for customers that can't hold gas for compliance reasons. That does happen in some jurisdictions, but it also just makes it simpler, because it is one less thing that people have to manage.
I think that speaks to the nuance and the level of understanding that comes from when you take the time and care about, well, how are these people actually going to use it? It's not let's build it and they will come to my blockchain app, but it's more considering, oh, hang on a second, if I want developers to be building with this stuff, they're developers from a Web 2 world that are not used to having to consider gas and transaction fees. I think if you're an AI developer, it kind of touches on there because there is a
Mm.
concept of tokens whenever people make calls to your AI that's answering. Like we put these podcasts on the Redbelly website. In the community, I've built an app that has the same thing off YouTube points people back to the YouTube. But whilst they watch this episode, guess what, Nick? They can ask questions. Did Mark say anything silly? Did give me a summary of Nick's key points. We're using AI for that, and that's got tokens kind of like gas, fees for transactions. But certainly people are not used to up and down gas fees. They're certainly not used to having to consider that for transactions. So I think relays and abstracting that away is important.
Yeah, and then just being able to pay someone in Australian dollars or US dollars instead of the gas tokens on the various chains just makes it so much more simpler for them.
You have to become a bit of a Forex manager just to work in the space without these features. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Something else that you touched on there, like that, given that cross-border payments and people want it's the speed. So thinking that low cost was one thing. Okay, I think it's valid, but speed really showed it, and you never really know until you do these surveys. And I highly suggest people to check that out. But in terms of that speed. Like Redbelly, what's interesting about them is that we've got this concept of finality, and it is other blockchains, they have probabilistic finality, and we've got a different way of doing it so that if something is final, it's final. There are these innovations that need to happen to give more trust, not just to traditional finance, but traditional finance doesn't exist in a vacuum. They do things and services to serve retail customers. It's this cycle. Do you think that we're going to see more of these, like things that we're used to in a traditional kind of finance space, just coming on board? And to that point, like, do you guys put out there, like, here's our roadmap, here's the kind of stuff that we're thinking about if people want to learn more?
Yeah, look, we do have a roadmap, but the roadmap is provided to our customers. We don't put it out completely publicly. Well, some of the features we do, like I talked about that Fireblocks Pulse, but yeah, most of the roadmap is sort of shown to our customers, and we look 6 months to 12 months ahead. And some of the things that we've been focusing on is things like re-architecting our infrastructure to make sure that we can handle the scale of chains like Redbelly that have large scale and instant finality and things like that. So yeah, it's definitely something we're always looking at, but it's not necessarily public.
No, that's very good answer. And I think that's why it's important for partners to also watch this kind of stuff, and even potential partners. And speaking of, if people want to, if I'm a retail person that wants to learn more, if I'm a potential partner, or a startup that wants to use this in Australia, just starting off there, what's the best way for people to do all of that, to learn more and get started?
Yeah, so if you're a retail person, the best place to go to is our LinkedIn or our Twitter or our website. There's plenty of information there. If you're someone that's wanting to build and build on top of Fireblocks, we have a sandbox. So you can go to our website and just enter in a couple of details, and you'll get a Fireblocks workspace. And you can then build an application using our APIs. So you can get that for free. And then when you're ready and you know what you want to do, you can either sign up with a credit card, or if you're a larger institution, you would come and speak to someone like Shane or myself, and you just contact us on the Fireblocks website.
Absolutely amazing. A lot of links, a lot of things for people to look into there. The Redbelly community are real good detectives, as you may have seen over the last couple of days as people were prepping for this particular podcast. Nick, we'll have to get you back on the show and do some deeper dives, especially once Project Acacia is getting started and seeing what is going on there. I think that there was some really interesting insights that you shared, and just lifting the lid a little bit, because there's so much detail as to what goes on in traditional finance. And as we start to transform it with blockchain, it is going to be a bit of a journey, but there's a lot of opportunity, I think, is the most important thing. When certainly not at a peak, we are literally just getting started. But Nick, thank you so much for your time. Hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, I'd love to come back.